My name is Adunni, and I am the owner of Taste Tutor, and we provide cooking classes like this. We do seasoning blends that we have available online for sale. And today we're going to be making a Nigerian-inspired dish. It's called akara, and I'm going to be pairing it with a spicy peanut dipping sauce. So it goes well. It is fried, so it's not the healthiest, but the point of today is to learn about the benefits of legumes. And this is going to be an example of that, one of the more creative ways to use legumes. And then I will talk through just some of the health benefits as I'm cooking. So I did do a lot of prep work just to try to shorten the demo today so that Ashley has plenty of time to talk to you. But I'm going to turn my camera around so that you can see the food, and then we'll get started. So just give me a minute. Today we're going to be making akara and then the spicy dipping sauce. But we're going to start with the dipping sauce so that our bean fritters are hot. So we're going to go over in this column here. So the dipping sauce is going to consist of, we're going to heat everything in some red palm oil. And this is different than like the palm kernel oil or anything that you would see in different baked goods and stuff and packaged goods. This is basically the oil from the whole fruit and the kernel mashed together. And it's produced in West Africa. You can get it at some West African stores here or on Amazon, because Amazon has everything. So this is the brand that I typically buy. And it does have like a tropical fruity flavor and smell, but it's very subtle and it has a high smoke point. So it's great for cooking in really high heat. And it's got a lot of antioxidants, so that's great. We've got bell pepper, onion, habanero, which is optional if you don't like spicy, garlic, ginger, tomato, curry powder, and then some Taste Tutor seasoning, which is just our all-purpose blend. That's what it looks like, available on the website. So I'm going to move this stuff so we can start with that. And then it's actually going to come together really simply because everything is just going in the blender and then going into the pan. So we can do that. And then a little bit about legumes. So I chose this recipe because it is generally pretty flavorful, and you can use pretty much any legume you want, maybe except peas, to recreate this recipe. But black eyed peas is the traditional way to do it. So I'm going to take my little blender here, and I've just got the roughly chopped onion that I'm going to put in here, and the roughly chopped bell pepper. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my heat on so that we can start to get the pan hot. I'm turning that to medium high heat. And then let me see if I can fit this stuff in here too. So I'm just going to put everything in here except for the peanut butter. And we're going to just pulse it so that we get like a blend, but also have like little bitty chunks in there as well. So this will work in the regular blender. I'm just using 2 so that I can not have to wash in between for purposes of time. I'm going to mute it just so that you can see, so you don't have to hear the blending, but I'm just going to blend.
Hi, Anne. Thanks for joining us. Chef Adunni is just blending some vegetables, so she's on mute. But thanks for joining us.
Okay, so this is kind of the consistency that you're going to want. So it's like little pieces, but there's still some sauciness happening. So all I'm going to do with this now is scoot you guys over so that you can see what's going on in the pan. I think you can see. So I've got the pan on and I'm going to add my palm oil, and you'll see that it'll maintain its color, but the longer it sits in the heat, it'll start to lighten. But we don't necessarily need it to lighten that much. So we just want it to melt down like that. And it should be pretty hot since I started the pan. So I'm gonna take my sauce contents and pour it into the pan here. And we're trying to cook most of the water out so that it's like a thick consistency. So that's why we're leaving it on medium high to high heat. We're just gonna let that water cook out. And this combination of ingredients is typically used for like a lot of sauce and soup bases. In Nigerian cooking, it's just basically how smooth you blend the puree and what you use it for is really the benefit. So let me talk a little bit about legumes while the water is cooking down. So basically what legumes are seeds from different plants, and they're within the same family. So that can include things like peanuts, chickpeas, lentils, peas, kidney beans, black beans, those kinds of things. All of them are really good sources of plant protein. They're also really good sources of fiber. So that definitely helps with your gut health and satiety. So if you're doing plant-based, because I feel like I always talk about that, then this is a great way to get in some protein and keep you full for a long time. The other great thing about legumes, generally they're less expensive. I know everything is pretty expensive right now, but generally they're one of the lesser expensive foods, and they're very, very versatile. So you can pretty much buy dried beans, canned beans, frozen beans, and do a whole lot of things with it, not just stewing it or eating it over rice, but you can make fritters out of it. You can make things like hummus with the chickpeas. And sometimes you can even buy bean flours and use those as part of a supplement for like baking items. You don't want to necessarily replace regular flour, but you can use it as a supplement. So you can see the sauce is cooking down. It's turning like a brighter yellow. I'm just going to let the water keep cooking out. Legumes also have great sources of iron and vitamin B and other nutrients. And there are studies that say that they may help to improve blood pressure, reduce cholesterol, lower heart disease, and promote weight loss. But generally eating, a healthy diet full of lots of antioxidants and varieties of colors of foods and stuff like that will generally help with overall health. So I'm sure that there's some sort of link to eating beans and those things because it's part of a healthy, balanced diet. Now, specifically with black-eyed peas, which are in the cowpea family, those originated in West Africa and were brought to the West Indies and the American South by Africans. So that's why they're very popular in foods in Africa as well as throughout the diaspora. And there's something very similar to this particular recipe, like in Brazil, in Ghana, but there are also a variety of other recipes that black-eyed peas are used in. And they have 5 grams of protein and 8 grams of fiber per cup of the cooked bean. And if they're paired with brown rice, you get a complete protein. So that's a benefit as well. Now, in terms of cooking them, the dried beans do take quite a while, but there are some methods to help move it along faster. You could soak them overnight, or you could boil them to soften them and then use them as you'd like. Or you could just put them in the crock pot and cook them that way. But there's lots of things you could do. So,
Chef Adunni,
yeah.
if you put them in the crock pot, how long would that need to be?
So when I make black eyed peas, I put them in the crock pot on low for 8 hours, like with the smoked turkey and all that stuff. But usually, like, I'll do it on the weekend, or if I'm about to go to work, I'll start it in the morning and then it'll be done by the time I get home. So
thank you.
So now that the water's been cooked out, we're just going to add our Taste Tutor seasoning and some curry powder. And the recipe should be available to you if you haven't got it already. Jasmine will send that out. And then the last thing we're going to do is add some peanut butter. This is just regular smooth peanut butter. And not too much, because you don't want it to be like Thai food. You just want a little bit of peanut flavor in there. And let it melt down. And then taste for seasoning if you'd like. But that's pretty much it for the dipping sauce. So we're gonna take that out of, well, we'll just leave it. We'll take it off the heat, but we'll leave it in the pan. You can also use this as a spread, because once you see what the fritters look like, they sometimes are used kind of like how falafel is used for a sandwich filling instead of having some sort of meat. So you could make like little sliders with it and spread the sauce on top of it, which is nice. Okay. So now we're going to move on to making the main dish. Give myself some more room here. Okay. I already started heating my oil, and you can do this in a deep fryer. I just don't have one, so I'm doing it on the stovetop.
And Chef Adunni, for those who have an air fryer and don't want to deal with the popping of the grease and all of that, can we just put it in our air fryer?
Well, I think you'll see with the batter consistency that might be a little tough because it's really wet.
Yeah.
And I haven't tried like baking them, so I don't know what that would be like. But what you could try if you have time is pouring the batter out onto parchment paper and freezing it. And then once it's frozen solid, maybe put it in the air fryer to see what happens.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That could be, something to try. Hopefully it doesn't mess anything up, but
perfect.
You could try. All right, so let's move back over here. And this one also is pretty simple to put together because it's also blending. So what I've got here is a 1/2 pound of soaked black eyed peas. I did these overnight, so it's just soaked. They're still raw. No cooking has happened. And I'm going to probably add a little bit of water to them. And you just want to do like 1 tablespoon at a time just to be able to get it to start blending smoothly. Okay. So I'm just going to add like just the smallest amount of water. And I'm going to start to blend, and then I'll add the rest of my ingredients. I'll put you guys back on mute. So traditionally, what you would do with these beans is when you soak them, you would peel them as well. So you would get all the little skins off so that there are no black specks throughout. And that's more cosmetic. You don't have to do that. So that's why I'm skipping that step, because it does take a very long time to do that. You have to like rub them between your hands and then like keep pouring off more water and stuff like that. So we're skipping that step. It'll still be great. It's just, it'll have some character to it. So I blended the beans. I'm gonna add some of the vegetables just to get more water going, because I don't want to add too much water to it. So I've got the red pepper. I've got a habanero, which is again optional. I've got the onion. And I'm gonna go ahead and put in my vegetable bouillon paste. And this is just because since it's a vegan recipe, we want a little bit of savoriness. So that's why I'm adding the vegetable bouillon paste. And this is just that Better Than Bouillon brand that you can get in the soup aisle. But you can use chicken bouillon if you want, or whatever you have. It doesn't have to be this particular one. And then some Taste Tutor seasoning. And the last thing we're going to add is baking powder. And this will help to make it light and fluffy once it hits the oil. So let me go ahead and blend some more. All right, so we're gonna push down the contents just to make sure everything gets blended smoothly. And you want this to be like a super smooth paste. Because the beans are raw, they're gonna be cooking in the oil. So you want all of the different structures in the beans to just be broken down as much as possible so it cooks fast. Because no one likes to taste the raw beans. It's not very fun. So we're gonna keep blending until we get super smooth paste. Okay, so let's see what we're looking like here. I think this is pretty smooth. So I think we might be ready to start frying. Okay, I'm gonna go with this being good. And
Isabel has a question. Go ahead, Isabel.
yeah.
So is canned beans an option? You know, like draining the beans and rinsing them off. I know you can buy black eyed peas that's already pre-cooked and just draining them. Is that an option?
Well, it's not for this particular recipe, just because for some reason, the texture doesn't come out right when the beans are already cooked, versus when they're raw and you're putting them in the fryer, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's like, I know like if you're making something like a falafel, it can work. But for some reason, for this one, it just doesn't turn out right when the beans are cooked first.
Thank you.
And Adunni, does it provide like a grainy texture when you do it that way? What
it's just really like mushy and wet. Because there's nothing really holding it together other than the beans themselves. So there's no flour or anything. So you're just frying like wet beans, basically. And because there's so much water already in the beans, the oil is like being absorbed into it. So it's just really a wet consistency.
Thank you.
Okay. So the last thing we're gonna do here is fold in some green onion. And you don't have to do this part, but I just like the flavor and the texture of that. So fold that in. And now we can check and see how hot our oil is. Check and see how hot our oil is and then start to fry. Let's see. So we're trying to get to 375. Right now we're at 330, so we'll give it some more time. But while we're waiting for our oil to heat up, do we have any more questions or anything like that? No? Okay. So what I'm gonna do, one tip that I like to share is whenever I'm frying anything or baking something that's portioned, I like to use these ice cream scoops, and you can get them at, I got this at Cash and Carry, or I guess it's called US Chef Store now. But I'm sure they have them at like Costco or maybe even grocery stores or Walmart or of course Amazon. And they have different sizes. So I'm going to use the black scoop because that makes a nice size fritter. But like, for example, if I'm making cookies or something like that, or even making muffins, I scoop out the amount of batter so that it's the same amount in each cup or for each cookie. So you make sure that everything cooks at the same time and it's even. So that's a little tip. Okay, so we're at 347. I might start at 350 just to get it going, but.
And Chef Adunni, use regular canola oil or vegetable oil?
Yeah, so this is just vegetable oil. You can use canola oil. Either one is fine. What would be great is peanut oil because I don't know. I just feel like peanut oil when frying it provides a better texture fried food. So that would be what I would recommend like first, but this is just vegetable oil that I'm using.
Thank you.
Chef, when you clean up like oil like that, is there anything special concerns like with bacon oil or anything? Or are you able to just put it down the drain?
Oh, so when I do oil, I wait for it to cool and then I pour it back into the container it came in, or into like a triple plastic bag, and I throw it out, just because I don't think you're supposed to pour stuff down the drain. I heard it messes up like your garbage disposal and stuff. So that's typically how I get rid of it. But like with a lot of oil like this, I might use this again to fry something else, and then when that's done, I'll just toss it. Sometimes if I'm really feeling really like I don't want to waste this, I'll just like pour it back into the container and then just use it to cook with. But I don't think you're supposed to do that either. I just don't like to throw out so much oil. Which is why it's great if you have a fryer, because you could just leave the oil in the fryer and use it a bunch of times until you're ready to change the oil. Okay, so we're ready. Let me turn this down so it doesn't get too hot. And I'm just going to scoop like a level scoop of it. And the first one always comes out a little weird, so we'll see how it goes, but we're just gonna drop it right in there. And do you see how the texture is like not really conducive for just putting it in the air fryer? You just want to drop them directly in here and they'll float to the top. And they form like little fritters and they're so cute. And you want it to cook until it's golden brown on both sides. About a minute to a minute and a half. Let me turn some of these over because I don't want them to be too dark on one side. See, like that.
That was quick too.
Yeah, and my oil is a little bit hot, so that's why I turned the heat down. But the first batch is always a little weird. But yeah, so this is basically what they're supposed to look like. Little fritters. They're like little bean beignets or something. And you can change up what you're adding to it. Like if you want to put some other flavors in here, if you want to like fold in some like canned salmon or something, you could do like a mashup of salmon croquettes and these and have them for breakfast. These are typically eaten for breakfast too, or for like a street food snack. Mm-hmm. You could add other vegetables in it, anything you want really. My mom used to make these for us all the time when we moved from Nigeria. So these are kind of nostalgic for me as well. All right, so I think this one is probably, I'm gonna leave it in just a little longer. I wanna make sure that it cooks all the way through because, you know, you don't wanna bite into like a wet fritter attachment.
Yeah, they look like little hush puppies. They look so good.
Yeah, actually, yeah, they kind of have the similar consistency. Yeah. So that's something that is kind of a relatable thing. So let me take one out and I'll test it off camera just to make sure I don't didn't mess it up, and then I'll show you guys.
And do you check the internal temperature or does that not matter?
I don't check the internal temperature with the thermometer. I just open it up and see if it's cooked through. And then I know like how long to cook the rest of them for. So yeah, so they need to cook a little bit longer because this one isn't cooked all the way through. But I will set it aside. But I think now that the oil has been turned down, they should cook more evenly through without getting too dark on the outside. So yeah, this is basically it. Again, you could do this with other types of dried beans. So following the same steps. So you soak the beans and then add your vegetables, blend it all up together to form a paste, and then fry it up. And that's that. And like I said, you can, what I've seen is like people will take little slider buns, like if you have Hawaiian rolls, you can cut that in half, put one of these in there with some like hot sauce or something like that, or that dipping sauce, and like a slice of tomato and a piece of lettuce, and you've got little sliders. And it's all vegan for those of you who are into that.
Yeah. Thank you, Chef Adunni. While she finishes that up, I'm going to put our poll up. Just want to understand your learning now that you've done this workshop, and also if you'd recommend it to a friend. So I'm going to go ahead and put the poll up. If you need help with it, let me know. I can always email it to you individually. So that'll go up now. Can you guys see that? Perfect. All right, I'm going to leave that up for just another minute. All right, does anybody need more time? Did everybody who wanted to complete it finish? All right, I'm going to go ahead and put it down in about 10 seconds. Perfect.
I don't think mine said failed to submit. I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's okay, Callie.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can send it to you.
Okay.
Unless you want to try it again.
If you can put it up again, I'll try it again.
Oh, do you see it still? Okay.
Right.
I'll email that to you.
So I'm pulling out the ones that are done, and I'll continue to fry once we're done. But I just want to show you what the inside of one looks like, and then I will let Ashley take it over from there. Okay. You guys over. Here's what it's looking like.
Good stuff.
And then let's open one up. Hopefully it's actually cooked through. So you can see that's what it looks like on the inside.
That looks really good.
Yeah.
Cute nails.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, Chef Adunni. So we have, as I mentioned, we have Ashley Bullock on the line today. And she is from King County Lead and Toxins team. And now that we've done this workshop, we're going to talk about lead and toxins that can be found in cooking spices, cookware, and in the home. And we do have a presentation to show you guys. So I'm going to share my screen and then Miss Ashley will take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine, and thank you, Chef Adunni. And thank you, everyone, for letting me present today. As Jasmine said, we're going to talk a little bit about common sources of lead in the home. And there's been some recent news around lead in spices and lead in cookware. So we thought this was a really great fit to talk about. And then we'll also talk a little bit about ways that we're hoping systems will change to protect families better, because lead is a entirely preventable toxin that children and adults should not be exposed to. And there are ways to keep one another safe and ways that our government and our healthcare system could be doing a better job. So I'll talk about that a little bit as well. And you can go to the next slide. So what is lead? Lead is a heavy metal. It's naturally occurring in the Earth's crust. It is tasteless and odorless. And it's also super useful in manufacturing practices. So it's used in construction, plumbing, batteries, solders, paints. And up until 1978, it was used in indoor paint for our homes. And up until just the 90s, I believe, it was also used in gasoline. If at any point there's any questions, sometimes I get in my zone, but please feel free to unmute or put up your hand or whatever it is, because this should be a conversation, less me just talking. So, so lead is found all over our homes, and it also can get into our food through multiple sources, which we'll talk about. And then the next slide. And for adults, lead isn't as much of a concern. We definitely want to make sure that adults aren't getting huge quantities of lead, because over time it builds up in our bodies and it's stored in our bones and our teeth. It's distributed to our brains, kidneys, liver, and bones, and it can cause issues like high blood pressure and hypertension, difficulties with memory and concentration, fertility and pregnancy issues, and joint and muscle pain. And for folks who are pregnant, one of the major concerns is that because lead is in your bones, when you're pregnant, your body pulls nutrients out of your bone marrow and uses it for the growth of the baby. And so if you have large amounts of lead stored in your bones, it can affect the child early on in life. And next slide. But we mostly focus on kids because kids are growing, their body sizes are smaller and they're eating more. They're also doing things like, they're on the ground, they're touching things, they're putting things in their mouths, which is really how they get exposed to lead, because lead is mostly gets into our bodies if we eat something or we're inhaling lead dust. And so with kids, lead is much more of a concern, and we want to be really thoughtful about where they could be getting exposed. Next slide. And for kids, the biggest thing that we're concerned about is really the effect on the brain. It can cause damage to the brain and nervous system. It can cause learning and behavior problems. You may have saw there was just a news article, a new research article out about the number of children that were affected by leaded gasoline in the 70s. And it's estimated that it lowered some folks' IQs by 1 or 2 points, which is significant when we're talking about lots of little kids. And of course, we never want to hear of a child having preventable brain damage. It can also slow growth and development of kids and cause hearing and speech problems. Next slide, sorry. I don't want to scare folks because it can sound really intimidating, but there is a lot we can do to keep ourselves and our families safe. And so when we're talking about our risk, we're really thinking about the toxicity of the toxin. So how dangerous lead is and how much contact you have with it. So with kids, we really want to avoid any exposure to lead if possible, because no exposure is safe. But with adults, we think more holistically about, what you're eating, where your home is and the age of your home, where you work, what your hobbies are, and what could be exposing you, and really just making changes to lower your exposure as is, to a degree that's easy for you. Next, yep. And lead is really a environmental justice and an environmental racism issue. Again, lead is 100% preventable. And we know that communities of color experience lead poisoning at higher rates. And this is because of historical racist policies like redlining and inaccess to resources to make our homes and our neighborhoods less safe. We know that communities of color are more likely to live near landfills and hazardous waste sites. They're more likely to live in older homes with environmental risks like lead, mold, and asbestos. And they're more likely to have higher exposure to rates to air pollution, which is why it's so important that we talk about how, as a community, as a nation, we think about these inequities and how the system and our government should be prioritizing giving resources to communities of color, especially the Black community, and thinking about our health as a whole, because we know that this has a really huge cost for different communities. Next slide, please. And I wanted to show that there are pretty significant disparities between race and poverty status when it comes to blood lead levels. So that 5 micrograms per deciliter that's up there, that's the CDC's action level, which they actually just lowered, but that's where they children who have elevated blood lead levels are eligible for services and where it's considered a hazardous level. And we can see that non-Hispanic Black children have that higher rate of blood lead levels at almost twice the rate of non-Hispanic white children and other races. And then again, for children who are below the poverty level, 130% below the poverty level, they also experience increased blood levels. And I'm gonna pause. Are there any questions? Okay, I'll keep going. So next slide. So we're going to talk mostly today about spices and cookware, but the #1 source of lead exposure is still lead-based paint, even though it was banned in 1978. So I always want to mention that. And it's estimated, just based on property age, that about 55% of houses in King County may contain lead-based paint. It's possible to have it removed, but it is quite expensive. And it's good to know that as long as your paint is kept repaired and it's not flaking, then it's not an issue. And where the little circles on the picture there are kind of like high risk areas because, they're getting used a lot. So we'd talk about like handrails that you're touching, your windows and your doors where things are scraping and paint is potentially being disturbed. And then around the house, if you have kids, you'd want to make sure that your soil is covered because of course the paint could flake off from weather and things like that. Next slide. And as I said, lead is in so many different things that it can be really challenging for us to figure out the sources of lead in different products. Lead gets into our food because it can be absorbed by plants from the soil. It's naturally occurring, and certain things like spinach and kale and other leafy greens tend to absorb lead at high rates, which in some ways is great because it can be used as a natural way to remove lead from a certain area. But it also means we just need to be cautious about paying attention, and the FDA does regulate and look at especially leafy greens for kids' food, but it is something to be aware of. It can also be ingested by the animals we eat, or for folks who are hunters, if you're using leaded bullets, that can also be a concern. And then it can be accidentally added during the manufacturing process if there's leaded dust in the air, or food can become contaminated from the pottery or the cookware that we use to cook our food, and it'll leach into the food or drinks while we prepare them. Next slide. And this is a resource I just wanted to share. One of my coworkers also works on what's called the Dirt Alert program. And this is in South King County, and it's related to resources for folks who live within the Tacoma smelter plume. And that's the old, I guess they smelted lead, but it's been defunct for almost 100 years, but because of the smelting that they were doing, lead and asbestos were put out into the air and traveled around that area and settled into the soil. So for folks who are gardening or who have kids who are playing outside a lot, it's good to know if you live in that area and to cover your ground or to take action to clean up your soil. And so this map is something that you can access for free by just turning on your camera and turning it onto this little dinosaur QR code thing, and then looking up your address, and it'll show you whether or not you're within the plume area. And if folks are interested, we're more than happy to provide more resources. If you live in the plume, there are resources to have your yard cleaned up by the State Department of Health. And so I can share more about that if folks are interested, and we'll share out these slides hopefully so that you can also access the map and you can take a look. Yeah, next slide, please. And this is just a little bit more about the Dirt Alert, how to sample your soil and where to sample it. There are lots of great resources if you're concerned of labs, and I think it's about $25 to send in a sample and see if your soil could potentially be contaminated. And again, if you're in the plume, they will come do that for you for free. And this is really majorly a concern if you are gardening and you want to think about that, or if you have kids. The other thing is if you have kids playing in an area, you can just simply put bark or gravel or grass, and that'll eliminate any risk of them really picking up lead from the soil and being exposed. And next slide, please. So as I said, there's a lot of protections in place. They are not perfect, and we are always trying to put pressure on different organizations to do a better job to protect the public from lead. When it comes to food, it's the U.S. Food and Drug Administration that's responsible for monitoring and setting regulations for lead in cookware and food, and they actively monitor foods of concern, including food marketed for children or commonly eaten for children, like candy. And they also provide guidance on lead in bottled water, juice and candy, and tableware. One of the ways, if you're concerned about spices, for example, that link at the bottom is their recalls and safety alerts. So anytime there is a item that is found to have high levels of lead, that's where they post it. And it's a great it's essentially like a little Twitter feed, and it's pretty easy to follow along. Not a perfect system, which is why we think there should be more funding into testing so that it's not on individuals and communities to be thinking about what could be in their food, and it's better regulated. But that is one way to check on current potential issues. Next, please. And there's a couple of spices and herbs that are of particular concern, and it's for a couple different reasons. Turmeric, if it is imported in particular, they use lead in turmeric to create a deeper yellow color, kind of similar to henna. It has properties that make colors more vibrant, and so you'll also see it in henna because it helps it adhere to the skin and retain that color more. And then with thyme, oregano, and basil, because they're those leafy greens, they tend to leach the lead from the soil more. And so the Consumer Reports just did a research study on some brands to look at what brands were safe for use. And here I just pulled the oregano example. But if you go to the link at the bottom there that says Consumer Reports, they have the brands that they tested, and you can see which ones were found to be safe, some concern, and high concern. One of the challenges with spices is that it's highly dependent on the batch. So what we tell folks is, especially as adults, just think about your overall consumption. If you're using turmeric once or twice a month, that's fine. If you're using it every single day and you're also using thyme and oregano and basil, you may want to think about lowering that just because of the risk. And with children in particular, we would recommend not using these spices if possible, or at least keeping them limited. Next slide, please. Other things that as an individual we can do to keep ourselves safe is thinking about our cookware that we're using. Pottery that is highly decorative and imported from other countries can have leaded glaze. So, you know, when you have a bowl where you can feel the glaze ridges, like it has a texture, that can be a sign that it may have leaded glaze. And we would recommend only using that more for decoration or like storing your oranges or, you know, things that aren't hot or you're going to eat directly from, especially if it's older pottery. In the US nowadays, the FDA does regulate pottery that is sold for food, for use with food. So anything bought within the US is fine. It's just more things that may have been imported or are older than the last 10 years. And we just recommend avoiding using that for storing, cooking, or reheating. And our hazardous waste department just finished a research study that we're getting ready to push out publicly that found that aluminum cookware actually has very high levels of lead. And we figured this out because we have a large Afghan refugee community coming into King County right now. And when you come in as a refugee, you're required to get a lead test. And we were seeing kids with really high levels of lead. And it was discovered in the home investigations that it was from leaded cookware, aluminum cookware that they were bringing from Afghanistan, but we've done research since and found that aluminum cookware sold in King County also has high levels of lead. So if possible, avoiding using aluminum cookware and instead going for like cast iron or stainless steel is a safe alternative. And then another kind of simple one is washing your hands before you eat. Next slide, please. Other safe practices, avoiding spices that are hand carried from abroad in particular, and limiting
Learned that in kindergarten.
spices. Oh, sorry. Is there a question?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I just said we learned that in kindergarten.
Okay.
Wash your hands before you eat.
I know it's a little silly to put on a slide for a bunch of adults, but you know, what due diligence. And so avoiding certain candies, especially candies with chili powder from Mexico, which is very specific, but they tend to have high rates of lead. California does a great job of, because they see they have a large Hispanic community. They're really careful about keeping track of candies that come from Mexico and seeing what could be causing lead exposure. And just chili powder in general tends to have really high rates when it's from Mexico. And then certain spices and herbs we really have no concern with. So I just wanted to list them here. It's like black pepper, curry powder, garlic powder, coriander, sesame seeds. And those really have no concern for lead. And the other thing is just not to assume that organic means no lead, because that's unfortunately not included in their requirements to be organic. Next slide, please.
Just gonna say that's pretty tricky of them.
I know. Yeah, they don't have to test for heavy metals. And then the other great thing, which is perfect for this example, is that there are certain foods that lower your risk of absorbing iron or absorbing lead into your bones and your organs. One of them is iron, which you can get from beans and lentils, as well as from lean red meats, and then vitamin C and calcium. So especially for mothers or young women who are hoping to get pregnant, thinking about a diet that's rich in iron, vitamin C, and calcium is really helpful. And that's probably just good in general. Next, please. And then I did want to share, this is the food safety recall. Like I said, so this is what a recall would look like up on the top right there. They just put in a high level and you can click on it and see what it is. And so for example, that dried plums, when I clicked in on that, it gives you the summary and tells you the reason is the potential to be contaminated with lead, and the company name, and the time that the announcement was made, so you can see if that product, you might have that product. And you know, one thing that we really encourage folks, and we just did a big session with some of our community members around federal regulation, is, you know, making your voice heard, because there's a lot of funding and a lot of money around removing lead from our environments. And the federal government is not good at thinking about giving money directly to community. And that's really what we're trying to do, because we think that people know what they need. They know how to reach the folks who are most at risk in their community. And they know how to bring people in. And the EPA, it just released this new strategy that they're calling Strategy to Reduce Lead Exposures and Disparities in US Communities. And it's basically trying to take an anti-racist approach to their lead work, but there's still a lot of room for growth. And the biggest piece we've been talking about is, how do we get resources directly to communities? So if you're able to join the conversation on safe food regulations and make your voice heard, and I can share more at different ways to do that, that's something we really encourage, because we really don't think it should be on individuals to be constantly checking for food safety recalls to make sure that their children are not exposed to lead. Next slide, please. And this is just a little safety card. This is for children. This is something we, I think I sent to Jasmine some copies, which you're welcome to share out, and I can give more as well. And we have it online. But these are this is what would be considered a child who is at high risk for lead poisoning, and when we would recommend that they get tested. So if you live in a home built before 1950, they should get tested because of the lead paint. If they live and regularly visit a home before 1978 that has recent or ongoing repairs, they should also be tested because of that paint. Living in foster care, which is just because in foster care, we know that sometimes kids are in older homes or maybe moving around a lot. So we just want to make sure that we're testing them. And then if another child that they, you know, spend a lot of time with have elevated blood lead levels, or if they have a parent or caregiver who works with lead at their job or their hobby, if they're come from outside the US, just because different countries have different regulations on lead. So like the kids from Afghanistan, we know that it's not as regulated as it is here. So they should be tested. And then if you use traditional remedies or cosmetics or are covered by Medicaid, and legally all children on Medicaid should be tested for lead at 12 and 24 months, but doctors just really aren't doing it, which is a challenge. And part of it is because there's really a concept in the medical community that lead isn't an issue in the Pacific Northwest, because we're newer, you know, compared to the East Coast, we have newer housing, but we know that consumer products have lead. We know 55% of our housing stock could have lead. And we know that there are major disparities in the children who are experiencing lead. And so we always encourage parents to talk to their doctors if they have any concerns and advocate for the lead testing if they think they're at risk, because sometimes, and, you know, it's not entirely because the doctors are thinking, oh, it's not an issue, but we also know there's a lot going on, especially at those 12 and 24-month-old visits. So just knowing to advocate for your child or grandchild is useful. Next slide, please. And then for kids who do have lead poisoning, we have lots of resources available. If a child tests positive for elevated blood lead levels, they are referred to essentially what we call them environmental investigators, but they're just folks who are a resource to talk about what the lead exposures can be. And if the family wants, they can come out to the home and test with, like, on site, they have a machine where they can test products, paint, soil, and figure out what is causing the lead exposure, and then help the family remove that lead exposure. And also all kids who have elevated blood lead levels are automatically qualified for developmental services, which is just like tutoring for little ones. And it's mostly actually training the parents on different activities they can do to help with counteracting any developmental delays. And it's been found to be really successful. So we always encourage families to enter into that. Next slide. So I'm gonna pause there, and that's all I have. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. And these are our contact information if anyone wants to email us with questions at any point.